Well, hi. Hi, Charlotte. I'm so delighted to talk to you about focusing oriented therapy today.
Yeah, no, me too. Me too. I've been looking forward to it.
Um, I don't even know how to introduce you because we've known each other and worked together for so many years. But I
Mm.
think I would want people to know that you have been doing a wonderful international focusing oriented therapy training for how many years? For a long time now.
Um,
And
I lose track, like 14 years or something.
oh my God, that is amazing, really. And I meet so many therapists who were trained by you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you and I have been working so closely on that training. That's been a real work of love with the two of us there as well in devising the curriculum, and that's constantly being revised and new things brought in.
You bring your own very special sensibility, your own style, and your own nurturing. It's like your students are your chicks, your baby chicks, and you bring them along and and cultivate each one of them. It's really quite beautiful.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think also because those trainings are so much experiential.
Mhm.
The teaching is only the didactic is only a piece of it. Um, that they have the dyads in class, they have monthly small groups where they work with coaches. They work with coaches in the class too, and uh, and then there's a lot of practice. Like we do practice weekends, so there's a lot of involvement. So it's like a whole community with the coaches, and then the whole community with the students, and it people are everybody's growing,
Mm.
and so it does feel like chicks in that way, in that there's a lot of input and love and work and difficult edges, as there's growing edges all over the place.
I love that growing edges all over the place.
So it's very engaging and very satisfying, and involving. When there's a cohort, a 2-year cohort going, I'm engaged with them. It's very uh I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be involved with. I feel very lucky.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I have that feeling too about my groups and trainings. It's like such a privilege. We learn so much, and uh, it's like being part of a whole developmental process that we're growing from in a different way than doing therapy.
Mm-hmm.
It seeing the evolution of new therapists and therapists who aren't new but maybe new to this kind of work is really amazing.
Yes, and also what you're pointing to there is the growth that you do, that you and I do as teachers.
Yes.
Every 2 years, even though I've been doing it for so many years now, with each cycle, I feel I grow so much and I become clearer in my understanding of certain things. My own teaching is always evolving. And so when I say growing edges all over the place, that's mine too.
Mm-hmm.
It's very
Yes.
growthful and very engaging and transformative. I mean, and I know it's not just my focusing training, it's other people's, when I've heard from others as well in their focusing training. When you're so involved in a focusing process like this, it's transformative. You really come out the other end different, but more
Mm-hmm.
to yourself, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at the same time different.
Yes, 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 yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's wonderful for me to see all of those growing edges in you all over the place. Now developing more about about focusing oriented therapy and coaching and leadership and
Yes.
all of the way that those cross together and
Mm.
your own take on that.
Yes, that's a real growing edge in me. You know, I've been so involved with therapy and focusing oriented therapy for so long, for like, I don't know, coming up for let me see. It's coming up, my involvement in focusing is coming up for 30 years. Now.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's amazing to think about it. And focusing oriented therapy for 30 years. And so, I mean, I teach coaches and have done for a while, but that whole area of focusing and coaching, and then organizational work and leadership,
Mhm.
you know, process oriented leadership is something that I find very exciting, and it's very interesting. So that's a
Mm.
growing place for me. Mm.
Yeah, and it's so timely. It's so very important at this time. And it seems like a natural outgrowth of um, focusing oriented therapy that honors and cherishes the evolution of the individual. And then naturally, since we are interaction and we are much more than the individual self, um, to broaden that out to leadership and groups and
Mm.
coaching and a wider
Mm.
network seems very natural and very important now. We so
Yeah, right.
leadership.
It's a natural evolution, and as you say, you know, with the world as it is, we need more and more for this kind of way of working to move into groups, um, and to move into organizations and companies
Mhm.
that are that are having such an influence. There are many groups having an influence, but certainly corporations are having such an influence on on the world, and uh, influence in terms of climate and impact on the environment. And so it's really important that this kind of awareness, which is actually starting to grow in the more advanced and
Mm.
forward-thinking companies.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and in leadership generally, and in companies generally, it's really being recognized that
Mhm.
the old command and control way of leadership really does not work. You know, it not only makes people unhappy, but it really doesn't work. And that you've uh, really got to tend to people in this process oriented, focusing actually oriented way, to be able to facilitate them, to be able to facilitate them to be their best,
Mm.
most positive selves. I mean, that's in any area. Mhm.
Yes, yes, yes.
Mm.
Certainly the facilitation and cultivation rather than the than the control is
Mm.
so important. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I want to ask you what, because I'm thinking way back 30 years, I can't imagine that. Uh, um, but what first attracted you to focusing? You've been so dedicated to studying it, to teaching it, to embodying it.
Mhm.
And I want people to know that you and your husband Richard are responsible for those videos that we have of Jean about focusing oriented therapy and those demos that we have that
Yeah.
are so precious. And you're responsible for videoing many of them.
So glad I did that. So glad I did that.
Yeah, you knew in those early days
Mm.
that that was historic. And many people didn't know that this was precious, and no matter what was happening, I remember, you would just get up and go with your camera and
Yeah.
or get Richard to go um, and capture those moments.
Mhm. Yeah, those moments with Gene were so precious, particularly as when he was invited to your place, he was talking about focusing oriented therapy and focusing within conversations, you know,
Right.
which as you've mentioned, I mean, he was a psychotherapist, and that's mainly how he did focusing. I mean, he developed focusing as a practice so that it was something that he could give to people to do
Mhm.
without therapy. But his way of practicing focusing was in therapy and was as part of focusing, therapeutic focusing conversations. So that's what I loved so much about when he used to come to visit your place. The videos, most of my videos of him are at your place in that apartment.
Yes, 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 yes.
This is
You know,
one.
I'm remembering when you say that that when I was his client all those years ago, he only brought up focusing once, and then I didn't even really take to it or know what he was talking about, and he just discarded it as he goes like, well, no,
Mm,
let's not think about that.
mhm,
And it wasn't until way later that I sort of recognized that uh, he was trying to introduce something that was very, very important to him, um, as a practice. But in therapy, it was just an organic part of our conversation. It wasn't something that I would even notice as a
mm,
separate thing.
mm. Yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? That's the beauty of it. And that's very much how I use it, and I know how you use it, in a way that it's this kind of seamlessly brought into the conversation and into the the the, f- the cadence of the conversation, the pacing of the conversation in
Mm-hmm.
the right time. And that, as you've said so many times, it's more that you're focusing as the therapist than
Mm-hmm.
getting the client to focusing, although the client does get to focus as a,
Yes.
but you're listening, you're focusing and you're listening to your felt sense as you're keeping someone company and you're tracking them. And that's what's so key for me.
Yes, yes. And you embody that so beautifully. Yes, I like to say to people, well, focusing oriented therapy is not that the client is being oriented, it's that the therapist is being oriented by the focusing. And if the therapist is in a focusing mode, then the system is.
Mm,
Then it's
yes.
the client doesn't have to be ready for focusing or something.
Mhm, mhm. So all those years ago, when I first came across focusing, I was training. I used to be in science, and then I was in science documentaries, and then I felt this calling to be a therapist, and so I did my training as a psychotherapist in England. And a dear friend of mine said, "I've come across this thing called focusing, and I'm having someone come to my apartment, and just a handful of us are
Oh, wow.
going to do a weekend with her." And I said, "Great." And not really knowing what it was, but really trusting my friend. And I remember we did some simple focusing exercises, and it was just like, eureka, it was like, this is it,
Wow.
and I don't know what it is, but this is it.
Mm, mm,
This
mm.
is, out of all the modalities I was learning at the time, and I was learning a few, it was like, this is really the goal. This is really what's happening. And
Mm.
when any of those are going well, this is it. This is the distillation of what I feel therapy is about, and going to this level and being able to work from this level
Yes, yes.
is the kernel.
Right, right, right. I had a similar experience meeting Jean, but I didn't know about yours all these years. Do you
Yeah.
remember anything about the exercises or
Oh, I remember it really clearly. It was actually
really?
this wonderful woman called Andrea. I'm pretty sure her name was Andrea, and she worked with the biospiritual
Hmm.
uh, from that school, and really just a lovely woman. And it was just, you know, like going in, doing partnership, the going inside, the making of something, the
Mm.
slowing it down, the focusing attitude. And I remember it so clearly that, and I actually found a golden egg. Golden egg. And as I found this golden egg, it was like, oh wow. I was finding a golden egg inside me, but it was also the focusing process felt like
Yes, was the golden egg. Yes.
it.
Isn't that something?
And it's like all the lights went on, and it was like, "Ah, this is it. I found it." And that was like literally that was almost 30 years ago. And ever since, I've been studying focusing in some shape or form and then going on to teaching it. You know, but I mentored with several people, you know. I mentored with Robert Lee, I mentored with Shirley Turcott, you know, like working several years
Mm,
to really understand their,
yes, yes.
been mentoring with you ever since I met you decades ago. Well, a decade and a half, or however, I
Mm,
lose track of time, but you and I, like uh your use of focusing with the relationship and expressive relating is really, I feel that it's, you never stop learning that,
mm,
uh,
mm,
a beautiful art in itself that's like a lifetime's work.
yes.
You never finish, you never stop learning and growing in that. Um, but you know, and I work with obviously with Jean, but it's been really applying myself and really imbuing myself with a few different approaches to focusing. Yours being very central, and then interweaving that with all my other understandings and trainings. So much crossing there that's so rich, that I know, you know, many people in the field do. They cross several different things, and that's the other beauty of focusing, is that, you know, you use focusing can be used with any modality. So there's not only people's different approaches and how they embody and carry focusing forward, but there are also all their other modalities and trainings,
Mm,
right? So, and that you can use focusing with any modality. It will deepen any approach, whether it's psychoanalysis, cognitive behavioral, whether it's coaching, whether it's body work, you know, whatever approach you use. This is the essence of the process of change.
mm. What would you say that this is when you say this is, that's the hard thing, right? What is the this? That's the essence. That's the golden egg. That's the kernel.
Well, it feels like there are a few different levels and ways of saying what this is.
Mm.
I know that Jean distilled it down in one way very simply to say focusing. I think I'm so bad with quotes, but focusing is basically having a this, right,
Mhm.
that you can be in relationship with,
Mhm.
like a that about a this.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. That
Uh,
it's like you are not your issues. You have your issues. So there's a you and there's an it. Uh,
mhm.
um, and you're holding the it. You're having the it.
You're having your experience.
Yeah.
And I love the way you also, you know, summarized it, which is so clear, which is it's focusing is about listening for the underneath. So maybe I should really start there. That, you know, that what we are, you know, the picture of the iceberg, that metaphor that so many
Mhm.
of us
You
know,
use that so well in your teaching, that iceberg metaphor.
the iceberg, that, you know, our regular everyday thinking is just that little tip of the iceberg. You know, the cognitive science says is 5% or less of our processing power, and that beneath the waterline is that 95% plus.
Mm.
You know, what Jean and what we call them the more, that of what we really is, who we really are, is that big vast underneath.
Yes, yes, yes.
And so when you're listening to somebody, when you're keeping company, you're listening for how that more is peaking up above
Yes.
the line. So you're listening to it with what kind of languaging. It often comes up with unusual, poetic, imagistic, metaphoric languaging. You're watching for it in the body because you see it coming up when there is like someone becomes animated, or there's a tearing, or the face may flush, or there's a sigh, or the voice could change, or there's a pause, but a pregnant pause. It's not an empty, dissociated, or struggling pause. It's a full of more pause. So you're listening to the language, you're watching the body, and more importantly, you're listening, or as importantly, you're listening with your own body.
Yes.
You're listening with your own, like beneath the waterline, you're tracking them, tracking the person and joining the person.
And I'm noticing your hand motions and your, you know, and there's so much in the hands, right? And it comes through you in those hand motions.
Yes. So you're listening and watching and feeling for the more that you know is there and that's emerging. So I when I sit down with a client, I'm coming with that intention.
Yes.
I know that there's a more that needs to be said, and I know that there's a more that's trying to emerge.
Yes.
You know, what we call the deeper point, that 95%, there's a deeper point that's made and that's coming from that 95%, that the person doesn't know what that is, and I don't know what that is, but I know it's going to be coming.
Yes, yes.
So when somebody starts a session and they're laying out what they're up against or what they're bringing, I'm listening to that content. I'm tracking the content that's above the waterline, and I'm going in with the intention to listen to what's coming, what that content's evoking,
Yes.
and what's moving and coming from the underneath. So I'm feeling it. Jean talks about that what we are made of is interaction, what we are is interaction. And you and I know that's a whole big something that we can't really go into now. That's a whole big
Philosophical, yes,
philosophical,
spiritual, everything. Yes.
a whole big something. But that in that one interaction that we are, that, as you say, is not a merger, we're still very uniquely our own individual selves, but there is a one interaction that we're being. I'm listening to that with my body and my own felt sense, to be able to point to when something's emerging.
So you're listening to the to use a different metaphor, to the music or the beat behind the words. And you're listening in your own body and your own system to how it's impacting you, and how in your empathic joining, how you experience it, your felt sense of their experience, and sort of feeling into that 95%
Mm.
when the person is maybe not even consciously aware that's what they're expressing.
Mhm, mhm. Right. So I'm listening to the content and tracking the content of what they're up against and what they're bringing. I'm listening for the words and the felt sense words, watching the body and listening with my own body. So those all happening at the same time, and noticing where the underneath is peeking through in
Yes.
content, and,
Hmm.
and then I'm pointing.
Yes, yes. And also how that content is a beautiful story about the underneath.
Mm,
You
mm,
know, how the person's what we used to call symptoms, or some people still call symptoms. And I love that Jean never uses that kind of language. But what we used to call symptoms, how they're an expression of this big story underneath.
mm,
And it becomes so interesting,
mm.
even even when maybe the person is stuck in saying the same things over and over, or not knowing what to say, or not having words. That sense of this mysterious big story, that this up here is an expression of,
Mhm.
uh, becomes really a fascinating engagement when we can tune into it.
Yes, very fascinating engagement, because you're connecting with the aliveness when something's emerging from the underneath, right? It's so fresh and alive and engaging because it's the person, it's the something deeper in the person that's coming to the surface, and it's always fresh and new when
Yeah.
that emerges. And so you're engaged with this very fresh, new, alive process. And so focusing is about a pointing. When something's emerging from the underneath, you point, and that pointing is, firstly, you have an open, it will only come if it's kind of welcomed and there's some kind of open curiosity. Doesn't even have to be a lot of open curiosity,
Uh-huh.
a little bit of interest, but if there's not just a little crack in the door, it won't come. So you're you're interested and you're engaging, even if the client can't be. So you're creating this field of open invitation in your being, in your way of being. And then as it peaks up, you're pointing to it. So you could be pointing by resonantly reflecting back those fire engine words. Or you could be pointing by just saying, oh, when you said da da da, that it felt like a little something came here. I don't know what that was, or even if I got that right. But what happens when I just say back da 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 da, or what happens here? And people usually get it, and if they don't, they might say, "What do you mean?" I say, "Well, everything kind of has an emotion or a feeling sense to it, like that there's a something that I even might say, just something that might come very subtle and murky in the body when you say da da da."
Mm.
And invariably go back and they say, "Oh yeah," and you can see and feel them touching into something, and then there's a more that comes. So you always know whether it's your your reflection or your pointing has worked or landed by there's a more that comes
Yes, yes.
that has a richness. So focusing oriented therapy or coaching, or what focusing oriented conversation, is a pointing to and then a making a something. Mhm. That you were mentioning. So oh, there's something, using this it language, or something, or there is, or there's something sad there, or there's something that gets antsy when da 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 happens.
Yes.
And as you say, it's a pointing to, and then when you make a something, it's not the person. They have a something that they can then keep company and listen to. And when you use the something language, you're not sealing it and capping it.
Yes.
If you say it's sad, well, that's
Right.
done and
Right.
done with, right? No
Right.
one can go with that. Oh, but there's something there that's sad.
Right. Right.
There's a
It's the thing that's not a thing.
mhm,
Right. Something.
mhm.